Chosen one, lock your attention on this message right now. That quiet confidence building inside you this week. Do not suppress it. The elite are not stumbling across your name by accident. They are watching you. And the reason the enemy has been working overtime to make you feel invisible, overlooked and underqualified is because he has already seen the room you are about to walk into. It all shifts in the next 24 hours. The obscurity, the silence, the feeling that your work is disappearing into the void. But here is what you need to understand before we go any further. This shift is not happening despite what you have done. It is happening because of it. Think back to that moment this week when you gave everything you had and nobody clapped. When you prepared, when you showed up, when you delivered something extraordinary and the room was quiet, you almost pulled back. You almost decided it was not worth it. But you did not. You kept going anyway. You did not know it then, but that performance, that specific moment when you chose excellence in the silence, was the audition that changed everything. You did not find this message by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. The Holy Spirit did. This is a divine appointment that was written before the foundations of the earth. You are standing at the entrance of something you have been prepared for your entire life. Stay until the final second of this message, because in the next few minutes I am going to hand you the divine verdict that confirms why your name is now circulating in rooms you have never physically entered. I am going to walk you through the exact moment this week when you unknowingly activated the attention of the elite. And at the end, I am going to give you the declaration that seals this new season open and locks the door on every season of being overlooked forever. Do not click away. Your future self is begging you to stay, because if you leave now, you leave before the verdict is read, and you deserve to hear what heaven has already decided about you. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has been strange, not chaotic, just charged. Like something is about to break open, but you cannot name it yet. Maybe you were in the middle of your work this week and suddenly felt a wave of something enormous moving through you, and knowing that what you were creating was bigger than the audience in front of you. Or maybe you woke up at 3 in the morning this week feeling wide awake, your mind sharp, running through ideas, feeling a pull towards something greater that you could not explain. Or perhaps you were standing in an ordinary moment and felt completely out of place, like you had outgrown the room without anyone officially announcing the promotion. You feel it. That suspended tension between who you have been and who you are becoming. Like you are standing in a hallway and the door at the end is starting to open. And in that hallway, the enemy has been whispering a very specific lie. Listen to your thoughts. He is telling you that the silence around your work is rejection. He is replaying that moment when you poured everything into your performance, your presentation, your creation, and the numbers did not move the way you expected. He is pointing to that moment and calling it proof that the elite will never notice you, that you are building something spectacular for an empty room, that the people in those exclusive spaces have already made their decision, and it was not in your favor. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this moment. Proverbs 22:29 says, "Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank." Listen to that promise. They will serve before kings. The word does not say they might. It does not say they will if conditions are right. It says they will. Your skill is not being wasted in obscurity. It is being refined for royalty. The silence around your work is not rejection from the top. It is preparation for the top. The enemy is trying to convince you that the quiet means the door is closing, but that is a deception. You are not being ignored. You are being evaluated. The heaviness you feel is not the weight of being overlooked. It is the weight of being watched by eyes that do not announce themselves. It is the particular pressure of someone extraordinary being processed by a room that does not yet have the language to introduce you properly. You think the moment you performed with everything you had and heard nothing back was failure. You think the silence after your greatest work was a verdict against you. But let me reframe your reality right now. That was not rejection. That was reconnaissance. The elite do not announce their attention. They observe first. They study first. They confirm what they already suspect before they make the call. and they have already suspected something extraordinary about you for longer than you know. That performance you almost did not give, that was the one that sealed it. Hit the like button if you feel this message arrived exactly when it was supposed to. Drop a comment below. What is one moment this week where you performed at your highest level and heard nothing back, and you are still wondering whether anyone was watching? You've spent years being the most prepared person in the room, and no one noticed. You spent seasons being faithful in the small, the quiet, the unseen. You showed up when you weren't invited. You gave when no one was watching. You built in silence while others performed on stages. And somewhere along the way you started to wonder if all of that faithfulness was just foolishness, if the waiting was actually wasting, if the preparation was for something that was never coming. But something shifted, something cracked open, and now the rooms are different. The calls are different. The eyes that find you in a crowd, they carry a different kind of weight, and you can feel it, not with pride, with reverence, because you know what it cost to get here. Some messages don't just inform, they activate. If something stirred deep in your spirit just now, you may be ready to receive the Chosen One's blueprint. This sacred guide reveals the 8 divine patterns behind your calling, your suffering, and your destiny. It also comes with the full audiobook, so you can absorb it during prayer, rest, or quiet moments with God. And for those called to speak His truth, you'll also receive Activating Your Prophet Mantle, a powerful bonus ebook for those carrying a prophetic assignment. The link is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited time. Now let's go deeper, because what most people don't understand is why this moment feels so unfamiliar. You've been waiting for breakthrough, but when it started to arrive, part of you almost didn't recognize it. Part of you flinched. And that reaction, that subtle recoil when the blessing finally showed up, that is the first thing we need to address. Think about what that flinch actually means. It isn't weakness, it isn't a lack of faith. It is the residue of every season where you reached out towards something good and had it pulled back before your fingers could fully close around it. It's what happens to a person who has lived long enough in the storm to forget what it felt like to stand in the sun. Your nervous system learned to brace, your spirit learned to guard. And so when heaven finally moved the clouds, something inside you whispered, "Don't trust this, not yet. Wait and see if it disappears like the others did." And that whisper, small as it was, carried enormous power, because it positioned you as a spectator to your own breakthrough rather than a full participant in it. You've been in preparation so long that preparation became your identity. Suffering became familiar. Obscurity felt safe, and now that heaven is opening a door, something inside you is suspicious of it. Not because you don't believe in God's promises, but because you've been disappointed so many times that hope itself started to feel dangerous. So you learn to manage your expectations. You learn to dim your own anticipation before life could do it for you. And that survival strategy which once protected your heart is now the very thing that's making you hesitate at the threshold of what you prayed for. There is something almost sacred about the way people in long seasons of waiting learn to survive. You become proficient in quiet. You become disciplined in the hidden place. You develop a relationship with God that is born not from celebration, but from desperation. And that relationship is deep and real and unshakable in ways that fair-weather faith never could be. But there is also a shadow side to long seasons of preparation, and it lives in the places you stopped allowing yourself to dream. The places where you quietly surrendered certain hopes, not in a grand, dramatic moment of surrender to God, but in a slow, almost imperceptible decision to simply stop expecting. You told yourself it was maturity, you called it trust. But if you're honest, deeply, vulnerably honest, some of what you labeled as surrender was actually protective despair. It was the heart-building walls so strong that not even blessing could breach them without triggering an alarm. And so now, standing at the edge of everything you spent years fasting and praying and contending for, your most sophisticated defense mechanism is aimed squarely at the door God is opening. That is the paradox of the long-prepared soul. And it has to be named before it can be dismantled. Think about Moses, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 years of reduction, of a life that looked like it had gone completely off course. a prince turned shepherd, a man of palaces turned a wanderer in the desert, and then the burning bush. And the first thing Moses did when God spoke his destiny over him was argue. Not because he lacked faith in God, but because 40 years of anonymity had buried his sense of divine capacity. The wilderness had done its work, and then some. It had stripped him of his Egyptian identity, which needed to go. But it had also layered him with a poverty of self-perception that he would have to fight to overcome. God wasn't angry with Moses at that burning bush. But he was persistent, because he knew the mission required a man who had settled the question of who he was in heaven's eyes. Notice what Moses said. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" And it is a question that sounds like humility, but is actually saturated with a deep misidentification. Moses had spent 40 years in a place where no one knew his name mattered. He had shepherded flocks in obscurity. He had listened to silence where once there had been the sounds of a palace, and that silence had done something to his sense of self. It had compressed him, minimized him, not in the way that godly humility minimizes, which elevates by surrendering, but in the way that prolonged invisibility minimizes, which simply erases. And so, when God appeared and declared his assignment, Moses heard the mandate through the filter of a man who had spent 4 decades being told by his circumstances that he was no longer significant. You know that filter. You have worn it. Maybe you are still wearing it right now, even as the rooms around you are shifting, even as the calls and the connections and the unexpected invitations are beginning to accumulate. Part of you is still standing in the desert, looking at the burning bush, asking, "Who am I to step into this?" And the answer God gave Moses is the same answer he is giving you right now. "I am that I am, and I will be with you." The question was never whether you were enough. The question was always whether you would trust the one who called you to be enough through you. And here's where it goes deeper, because that question, who are you in heaven's eyes, is the one most chosen people have never fully answered for themselves. You know the scriptures, you know the promises, but knowing them in your mind and being anchored to them in your core are two completely different things, and the gap between those two realities is exactly where the enemy sets up camp, not to make you deny God, but to make you shrink just enough, hesitate just long enough, and second-guess just frequently enough that the fullness of what was prepared for you never quite gets released through you. The enemy doesn't need you to become an atheist. He doesn't need you to abandon the faith. He simply needs you to stay small enough that the rooms you were created to walk into remain empty of your presence. He needs you to be just timid enough at the right moments that the assignments you were fashioned for get passed to someone less equipped who will carry them less effectively, because the enemy understands something that you have perhaps not fully grasped yet. Your absence from your assignment is not neutral. When you shrink back from what you were made for, something in the kingdom loses ground. Something that was meant to be healed stays broken a little longer. Something that was meant to be built remains unbuilt. The stakes of your obedience are not personal, they are generational. They ripple outward in directions you cannot see from where you are standing. But here's what's changing in this season. The rooms you are being placed in are not accidents. They are not coincidences or simply the result of your networking or your skill set. Heaven has been orchestrating a repositioning, and the people who are now noticing you, the ones with influence, with resources, with platforms, they are noticing something they cannot fully name. It's not just your talent. Talent is everywhere. What they are sensing is the weight that comes from someone who has been through something real and came out without bitterness. That is rare. That is what presence feels like when it has been forged in fire rather than manufactured for a camera. Consider what it takes to come through the fire without bitterness. Most people who suffer either harden or they break. They either build a fortress of cynicism around the wounded place, or they crumble under the weight of it. But there is a third category, and it is the rarest of all. The ones who come out refined, the ones whose pain was transformed into a kind of gravity, a gravitas that is felt before a word is ever spoken. These are the people who have faced their worst moments and discovered that God was present even there, especially there. And because of that discovery, they carry an authority in their very posture that can't be counterfeited. It can't be performed. It can't be learned in a seminar or cultivated through a strategy. It is only produced through the intersection of deep suffering and deep faithfulness. And the world, even the parts of the world that have no language for it, can feel it when it walks into the room. That is what is walking into rooms on your behalf right now. Not your resume, not your highlights, the weight of your survival sanctified, the depth of your journey transformed. And it is drawing people and opportunities to you that would have passed you by in any earlier season, because you wouldn't have been ready to steward them. But the wilderness made you ready. The silence made you ready. The silence made you ready. Every season that looked like abandonment was actually advanced preparation for a weight of glory you are only now beginning to step into, and what's coming next will likely surprise you, because most people assume the hardest part of being chosen is the suffering. But it's not. Stay with me. The hardest part is learning how to receive, because receiving requires a kind of vulnerability that suffering actually teaches you to suppress. When you go through enough, you develop a self-reliance that looks like strength, but is actually a wall. You learn to need less, to expect less, to carry it all yourself, because asking for help led to disappointment too many times. And that posture, that closed, self-protecting posture, will sabotage open doors if it isn't dismantled before you walk through them. Receiving is a spiritual discipline that is almost never talked about in the same breath as fasting, prayer, or sacrifice. But it belongs in that same category, because to truly receive, to open your hands wide and let the goodness of God flow into them without immediately deflecting it, minimizing it, or questioning whether you deserve it, requires a level of trust and surrender that is genuinely difficult for anyone who has been shaped by seasons of lack. There is a poverty mentality that doesn't just live in the finances. It lives in the spirit. It lives in the way you respond to compliments by deflecting them, in the way you downplay your own anointing, in the way you feel almost uncomfortable when someone speaks life and blessing over you. That discomfort is not humility. That discomfort is an orphan spirit that hasn't yet been convinced that you actually belong in the Father's house. Esther is a powerful picture of this. She was chosen before she knew she was chosen, positioned before the moment arrived. But when Mordecai came to her with the assignment, the moment her preparation and her destiny finally collided, her first response was hesitation. She named the risk. She calculated the cost, and Mordecai's words cut through every reasonable excuse she had with one devastating truth. Silence is not safety. Silence in the face of your assignment is not humility, it is abdication. And if you will not rise to the moment, God will raise up deliverance from another place. But you will have missed the thing you were made for. Sit with that for a moment, because it carries a weight that needs to land fully. God's purposes will not be thwarted. His plans will not be thwarted. His plans will not fail. Deliverance will come, the kingdom will advance. But whether you are the vessel through which that advance happens, that is not predetermined in the way we sometimes assume. Your willingness is a real factor. Your obedience is a genuine variable. You can be positioned perfectly and still miss your moment by choosing the perceived safety of silence over the terrifying obedience of stepping forward. And if that happens, you will watch from a distance as someone else walks through the door that was fashioned with your dimensions in mind. That is not a threat. It is a mercy, because understanding the stakes is what transforms hesitation into holy boldness. That word is not condemnation, it's an invitation. And the invitation is this: stop treating your calling like a burden you have to be worthy of, and start receiving it as a gift you were created to carry. There is a difference between those two postures, and heaven can feel the difference even when the words look the same. The person who treats their calling as a burden lives in a constant state of proving. They are perpetually trying to justify their place, earn their keep, and demonstrate their worthiness. Their work is driven not by love and anointing, but by fear. Fear of being exposed as insufficient, fear of failing the God who entrusted them with something significant. And that fear, though it can produce impressive outputs, produces them at a terrible cost. It hollows the person out from the inside. It turns ministry into performance and assignment into obligation. But the person who receives their calling as a gift, who understands that they were created specifically for this, that their story was not a series of mistakes but a series of preparations, that every hard thing they endured was building something in them that would be desperately needed in the rooms ahead. That person carries their assignment with a lightness and a joy that multiplies its impact. Because what flows from a full cup saturates. What flows from an empty one barely reaches the edge of the vessel. Now, once you understand that, you're ready for this. Because the shift from preparation to manifestation requires you to develop a completely new relationship with visibility. For years, invisibility was your covering. The hidden season protected you. It built you. It insulated you from premature exposure that would have destroyed what God was growing in you. But that same hiddenness, if you cling to it past its season, becomes a cage, and many chosen ones are sitting in cages, they themselves locked, because the cage used to be a cocoon, and they never processed the transition. This is one of the most profound and frequently overlooked spiritual transitions there is. The cocoon and the cage look identical from the outside. They are both dark. They are both constraining. They both involve a kind of enforced stillness that feels almost unbearable to the nature inside them that was designed for flight. But one is a season, and one is a sentence. One is a process, and one is a prison. And the only way to know which one you're in is to ask the one who placed you there, whether the time has come to emerge. Because if he placed you in the cocoon, only he can tell you when the transformation is complete. And when he does, when he says it is time, when he opens the door, when he places you in rooms and begins connecting you to people who carry what you need and need what you carry, the worst thing you can do is pull the door shut again and insist you aren't ready. Coming up, the hidden root beneath the hesitation, the thing that's been disguising itself as humility. Stay with me. Visibility is an act of obedience when God is the one calling you out of hiding. Peter walking on water wasn't arrogance. It was an act of obedience to a single word, come. The moment he began to calculate the storm around him was the moment he began to sink. Not because the storm got worse, because his attention shifted from the one who called him to the conditions that surrounded him. And Sereny chosen ones are sinking right now, not because their faith is gone, but because they are focused on the storm of scrutiny, the wind of criticism, the wave of comparison, instead of keeping their eyes fixed on the invitation that was spoken over them before they even stepped out of the boat. Let's be very precise about what happened to Peter in that moment, because the details matter enormously. He was doing the impossible. He was defying physics, defying logic, defying every reasonable expectation of what a human body can accomplish when it steps out onto open water. And he was doing it successfully. The miracle was not in his attempt. It was already in progress. He was already walking. And then he noticed the wind, not the water. He'd been walking on that, the wind, the thing that he couldn't see directly, but could feel pressing against him from every side. And that feeling of pressure from all directions, of environmental instability, of circumstances that had no regard for the miracle he was in the middle of, that feeling broke his focus. And it was the broken focus, not the storm itself, that caused him to sink. This is a precise description of what happens to chosen ones who are mid-miracle. You are already in the middle of something God is doing. The door is open. The rooms are shifting. The right people are appearing. The evidence of divine orchestration is all around you. And then you feel the wind, the criticism, the comparison, the who do you think you are, the old voices from the old season, the very real pressure of being seen by people who haven't seen you before. And that wind breaks your gaze. And the moment your gaze breaks, the weight of the impossible returns to your awareness, and you begin to sink back toward the measure of what feels manageable and safe and explainable by natural law, and you call it wisdom. But Jesus called it doubt. This brings us to the real turning point, and this is where we have to be brutally honest. Because the storm is real, the scrutiny is real, and when you step into elite spaces, there will be people who did not come from where you came from and who will never fully understand the journey it took to get you there. You will sometimes feel out of place in rooms you were divinely placed in. You will occasionally have to navigate voices, both external and internal, that question whether you belong. And here's the part no one wants to hear. Some of the loudest voices questioning your presence will come from within your own community, from people who knew you before, from people who are still in the season you just came out of. And their doubt will feel familiar because it will sound like your own old thoughts about yourself. There is something particularly painful about being doubted by people who shared your wilderness with you, people who watched you pray and fast and weep and contend, people who know the full weight of what you walked through and who, precisely because they know it, struggle to reconcile that version of you with the version that is now being elevated. Sometimes that struggle presents as skepticism, sometimes as silence, sometimes as the kind of subtle undermining that never quite says anything overt but communicates volumes. And because these are people you love, people whose opinion has mattered to you, people whose own struggles you are deeply aware of, their doubt carries a weight that a stranger's criticism never could. It finds the tender places, it speaks in a familiar voice, and it can, if you allow it, become a millstone around the neck of something that was made to fly. Do not be moved. Elevation is not betrayal. Growth is not abandonment. The fact that God repositioned you does not mean you have forgotten where you came from. It means He trusted you to carry the memory of that place into rooms where it can shift something. You were not promoted to perform for the elite. You were placed in elite rooms to bring something into them that was forged in places they've never been. That is not arrogance. That is purpose. There is a divine intention behind why God takes people from broken places and puts them in prominent spaces. It is not so that those prominent spaces can complete the person. It is so that the person can complete something in those spaces that could not be completed any other way. The boardroom needs someone who knows what it feels like to not be able to pay a bill. The platform needs someone who has prayed through the night with nothing but a candle and a crumbling hope. The stage needs a voice that has been forged in seasons where no one was listening, because that voice carries a texture and an authenticity that a voice built only in comfort simply cannot produce. When you walk into those rooms carrying the full weight of where you came from, you are not a charity case. You are an ambassador. And ambassadors don't forget the nation they represent when they enter foreign territory. They represent it more fully. And yet, beneath even that truth, there is another one. And this is the layer most people never reach. Because if you go deep enough, past the fear of visibility, past the misidentification with obscurity, past the imposter thoughts and the unfamiliar rooms, you will find something you didn't expect. You will find the real source of the resistance, and it is not the enemy, and it is not your past, and it is not the people who doubted you. It is an unresolved relationship with your own greatness. There is a part of you that has accepted suffering, that has made peace with being chosen for hard things. But there is a smaller, quieter part of you that has never made peace with being chosen for glory, for honor, for rooms that celebrate rather than test you, because somewhere in the theology of your survival, you began to believe that your value was most clearly expressed through your pain, that you were most useful to God when you were broken. And so wholeness, elevation, recognition, they feel almost spiritually suspicious to you, like they can't possibly be from God because they feel too good. This is one of the most subtle and most destructive lies that takes root in the souls of people who have suffered deeply for the kingdom. It is the belief that brokenness is your most holy state, that God is most pleased with you when you are most diminished, that elevation and flourishing are somehow less spiritual than suffering and obscurity, and it is a lie that masquerades brilliantly as humility, which is precisely why it is so difficult to identify and so resistant to dismantling. Because when you challenge it, it feels like you are defending pride. When you release it, it feels like you are becoming arrogant. The enemy is masterful at this construction. He takes the genuine virtue of humility and uses it as a frame around a portrait of self-erasure, and then convinces you that the two are the same thing. But they are not. Humility does not require your destruction. Humility is not the same as self-contempt. The humble person is not the one who thinks least of themselves. They are the one who thinks of themselves accurately, in the light of who God says they are, without inflation and without minimization. And who does God say you are? He says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says you are the head and not the tail, above and not beneath. He says the plans He has for you are for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. He says that eye has not seen and ear has not heard the things He has prepared for those who love Him. That is not the language of a God who wants you small. That is the language of a God who has been building something magnificent in the secret place and is now ready to unveil it. But hear this: heaven is not only your refuge in the fire, it is also the architect of your flourishing. Psalm 23 doesn't end in the valley. It ends at a table prepared for you. In the presence of your enemies, not after they're gone. In front of them. God sets the table before the battle is over because He wants everyone in the room to see what faithfulness looks like when it finally arrives at its inheritance. The table in Psalm 23 is not a private quiet dinner. It is a public declaration. It is God saying, "Look at what I do for the ones who walk through the valley and keep trusting me. Look at what I do for the ones who were left for dead and refused to give up. Look at what I do for the ones who sowed in tears through season after season, after season, after season. I anoint them. I fill their cup until it overflows. Not in hiding, not in secret, in full view of everything that tried to destroy them, because the most powerful testimony is not delivered in a church service. It is delivered by a life, a visible, flourishing, anointed, unashamed life that proves by its very existence that no weapon formed against it prospered. You are sitting at that table now, or you are standing at the entrance to it, and the only question is whether you will pull up the chair. Let me say something about that entrance, because standing at the entrance to your inheritance is not a passive position. It is an active one. It requires a decision, a real, deliberate, spiritually conscious decision to cross the threshold. Joshua stood at the entrance to the Promised Land with a people who had spent 40 years in a wilderness that was, in the natural, supposed to have been an 11-day journey. 40 years. And when the time finally came to cross over, God didn't carry them across. He told them to put their feet in the water first, to move before the miracle made the moving comfortable, to take the step while the Jordan was still flooding, while the path forward was still unclear, while every natural instinct screamed that this was not the right time, the right moment, the right level of preparedness. And it was only when the soles of the priests' feet touched the water that the river parted. That is the nature of your threshold moment. God is not going to part the river before you step in. He is going to part the river as you step in. And if you are waiting for conditions to become comfortable before you move, you will wait at the edge forever, because the miracle is activated by the movement, not the other way around. So before you move forward, before you take the next step into what heaven has been building toward your whole life, do this one thing. Release the agreement you have been holding with unworthiness, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. Look at it, name it, and then choose deliberately, consciously, spiritually, to let it go. Because the version of you that walks through that door doesn't need it. That weight was never yours to carry permanently. It was a garment for the wilderness, and you are not in the wilderness anymore. Name what you have been carrying. The rejection from a person whose approval you were never supposed to need. The words spoken over you in a season of someone else's pain and limitation, words that you absorbed and mistook for truth. The conclusions you drew about your own capacity during seasons when you were depleted and therefore not seeing clearly. The version of yourself you decided to believe in because it felt safer than believing in the one God had been speaking over you from before you were formed in the womb. All of it, name it. Hold it up in the light of what heaven actually says about you, and then put it down. Not because you have to perform strength, but because you are finally, genuinely ready to walk without it. Place your hand over your heart and declare this with me. I am not who the pain said I was. I am not defined by the seasons that tried to bury me. I release every label placed on me by people who could not see what heaven saw. I release the agreement with smallness, with invisibility, with unworthiness. I receive this moment. I receive this shift. I receive the rooms, the recognition, and the responsibility that comes with them. Not because I performed my way here, but because I was faithful in the unseen, and God saw every single moment of it. I step forward without apology. I step forward without acrology. I carry what I came from into every room I am placed in, and I trust that the one who called me is more than able to keep me, sustain me, and finish what he started in me. My name is in rooms I haven't entered yet. My assignment reaches further than I can currently see, and I walk into it fully, whole, ready, and unafraid. Let those words settle into your spirit. Let them find every room inside you that has been furnished with doubt and begin to redecorate. Because decorations spoken in faith are not just words. They are spiritual realities being called forth from potential into manifestation. When you speak these words with your hand over the place where God planted His Spirit in you, you are not pretending, you are prophesying. You are calling the things that are not as though they are, which is exactly what the God of Abraham modeled for us when He gave a childless man a name that meant Father of Nations before a single child was born. Faith calls forth. Faith declares into existence. And the declaration you just made, if you received it rather than just recited it, has set something in motion that the rest of your life will be an expression of. If this message met you exactly where you needed it today, don't let the moment pass quietly. Share it with someone who is standing at their own threshold. Leave a comment and tell me what broke open for you. And if you want to go deeper into the blueprint of why your life unfolded the way it did, the patterns, the suffering, the calling, and what God is activating next, the link in the first pinned comment was placed there for you. This community was built for people who are done being almost. Your time is now. Walk into it,